Hello and welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers. You are in season 5 of Wrestling at Random, where the theme is more wrestling than ever. I feel like so far, if you're listening in linear fashion through season 5, that has definitely played itself out, whether it be deep cuts from well-known major national wrestling companies or territories that we've never talked about before, all things in between. Here on this week's show, we have a territory that I believe we've seen bits and pieces in pro wrestling this week, maybe a match here or there in the bonus feed, but we've never had a full episode of Portland wrestling television, and that is what we were tasked with watching, I will say, by the randomizer. This is Portland wrestling from 1981.
This episode of Portland Wrestling aired July 25th. 1981. A little bit about the Portland territory. As this is our first trip, we haven't been to Portland. But the way the show works is, of course, we take all the internet's wrestling content, we dump it into the randomizer. We're talking 19,000 some entries of wrestling content in there. We fire it up, we give it a spin, and the randomizer says, watch this show. We parachute in, and we watch this randomly selected television show, pay-per-view. It could be anything. And here it's an episode of Portland television. The Portland territory, let's go all the way back. I did some research via Dave Meltzer's Wrestling Observer newsletter. Herb Owen started promoting wrestling in Oregon in 1925. Their company ran 67 consecutive years, running mostly the same cities every single week.
Just imagine that, 67 consecutive years of running the same cities every week and ostensibly getting big enough crowds that you had enough money to come back the next week. That is wild.
His son, Don Owen, debuted before the public as the ring announcer for his father's promotion in 1931. He took over as promoter for the territory and promoted all the way through until its final show at the converted bowling alley that he purchased, known as the Portland Sports Arena, in 1992.
With the low ceilings, that sort of iconic look, if you're familiar with it. By the way, because I'm overly pedantic, and you got it right, but whenever I hear Don Owen, I always think of how much I judge people based on whether they say Don Owen or Don Owens.
Yes, I nailed
it. Roy Shire, same thing. I just can't get past it. Copy editor never dies.
At its financial peak in the late 1970s, during the Buddy Rose versus Roddy Piper feud, it was a strong regional territory that every prelim wrestler in the business wanted to get into because you could get a chance to make a name for yourself in Portland. Buddy Rose's prime in Portland was between 1976 and 1984. We will see Buddy Rose on this show. He set gate records in virtually every city in the circuit when he feuded with Roddy Piper. He was one of the best main event heels in the industry. Rose was so successful in the area, earning in excess of $50,000 per year in the late 1970s.
Wow.
Which was big money for a small territory wrestler. He made Portland his home, and he worked most of his career there.
We will not see, sadly, Roddy Piper on this week's TV show. And man, when I realized watching this show that we were getting Portland wrestling without Roddy Piper, I became concerned.
But we did get Rose on the show. We'll get into it here. Besides working with Piper, one of Buddy Rose's most memorable feuds is with Matt Borne, which we will see later on in this episode.
We will see later on in this episode, and is also covered in great detail on the Matt Borne episode of Dark Side of the Ring, which I believe was season 4 of that show. Highly recommend, just for you get a sense of Matt Borne's state of mind, where Buddy Rose is at, but also they do a real good job of setting the lay of the land of what the Portland territory was. And like you said, it was a place where guys who maybe couldn't get to be top guys in other territories would have a chance being higher up the card there, and sort of then maybe being able to parlay that into bigger success outside of Portland.
This feud with Matt Borne was extra memorable because in real life, Buddy Rose married Matt Borne's sister and later divorced her, which was worked into an angle. And this was groundbreaking for pro wrestling at the time.
Well, groundbreaking for pro wrestling at the time. It also led to and fueled legit, hardcore, real hatred between these two men that they do a great job explaining in detail on the Dark Side of the Ring episode. But it does filter through to how their feud came across on television and the believability of it in the wrestling sense as well.
Because of his physique, Buddy Rose was never pushed during wrestling's national expansion. During the time, it was dominated by bodybuilders. And Rose, though, will always hold the distinction of being in the first WrestleMania match ever underneath a mask as the Executioner, losing to Tito Santana in the opening match at WrestleMania in 1985 at Madison Square Garden.
Well, we would also know, if you listen to this podcast and you've heard a lot of the things we've talked about from the AWA, you would probably know Buddy Rose best outside of being like really a jobber on the WWF side at times from his tag team with Doug Summers.
Yep. As
tag team champions.
Your uncle?
What's oh yeah,
your uncle Doug Summers?
No, completely different spelling. There's an O. There's only one M. God, I hate it when if you thought I couldn't handle Don Owen or Roy Shire misspellings, just imagine how much I hated when teachers would get my name wrong with that spelling. But no, particularly the Buddy Rose Doug Summers Midnight Rockers matches in the AWA, some of the best tag team matches of that time period, and probably from an in-ring standpoint, the highlight of Buddy Rose's career.
Buddy Rose received a $700 payoff for that WrestleMania match, and he quit the WWF after that because of that
one
payoff.
does.
Mm-hmm. One of the funniest comedy segments in the history of Saturday Night's Main Event was when Buddy Rose, who was well over 330 pounds at the time, did a mock diet commercial on the show called the Buddy Rose Blow-Away Diet, where he had Tide detergent blown on him and said that the pounds are just blowing off.
Tremendous. It's also crazy when you think about how good of a wrestler and character and heel Buddy Rose was, as you just talked about. And then Adrian Adonis as well. Two guys that did not have WWF style physiques, but were great professional wrestlers that basically ended up with slight variations on the same character in that company.
Portland Wrestling aired on KPTV Channel 12 in Portland for 38 years. The company's biggest show in history was in 1985 when Don Owen moved out of the 3,000-seat sports arena to the Coliseum for the 60th anniversary of Owen Promotions, selling out 12,000 seats for a Ric Flair versus Billy Jack Haynes main event. It was, if you want to actually see that match, as of the time of this recording, it's streaming on Amazon Prime. If you if you search for Ric Flair on Amazon Prime, you'll see his lost matches. It's this match against Billy Jack Haynes from Portland.
That's because this is one of the few prominent tape libraries from this era that the WWE does not own. So it sort of finds its way into a bunch of different tape libraries. The other thing we should note about
do you know where most of the tapes, most of the surviving tapes were Buddy Rose's own VHS collection.
It would be a promotion who would be lost to the sands of time, like so many other late 70s, early 80s territories. You think of Roy Shire and San Francisco, other places that Honolulu, that there isn't a ton of footage of because they just tape over at the station for the next episode. Buddy Rose is the reason why we even have documentation of that era. Also, it's noteworthy that you mentioned the 38 years of Portland wrestling. You may see Portland wrestling referenced often by Dave Meltzer on Twitter when shutting down people who say that Raw is in fact the longest running episodic television show in history. He will throw out two shows in the wrestling sphere, one of which is Portland wrestling, as an example of a TV show that was around longer.
Yeah, he also makes a note here that this this Ric Flair Billy Jack Haynes match that sold out 12,000 seats. It was the only crowd of 10,000 fans that Portland ever drew.
Wow.
Which is crazy to think about. That they
It
didn't
is
run
crazy.
the big building very often.
Yeah, like we think about them, like when you talk about territories, you talk about Mid-South, Memphis, Georgia Championship Wrestling, obviously the Northeast with the WWF, Crockett, all these different things. Portland is referenced as well, but when you dig down into it, like Portland was a much smaller territory. Like it had to be, from what we've seen in the 5 seasons of doing this podcast and the 150 episodes at least on the bonus feed. It has to be of like territories of consequence, not like random mid-Georgia championship and stuff like that, but territories of consequence. It has to be the smallest from sheer, numbers in terms of drawing fans. Obviously, they rank consecutively every week, but it's a small territory.
Like we mentioned, this episode is 1981, July 25th. This episode of Portland Wrestling is brought to you by Marv Tompkin Ford and Tom Peterson's Appliance Store. We're going to hear a lot from them over the course of this.
It is brought to you by them to the point to where it feels like an infomercial for those two things with a wrestling show thrown in to break up the commercials.
Yeah, this is what local sponsorship looks like.
Yes, local sponsorship bordering on local ownership. It feels like the show opens and we have, is it Frank Donovan or Frank Bonneman?
Bonneman. Yes, Frank Bonneman is our ringside host.
He is our host, and he is the most local news guy hosting a professional wrestling show of any of these. We've talked about how, like the greats, like Lance Russell, for example, that was their background, but they were great wrestling announcers. This guy is a local news institution calling a professional wrestling show. He starts breaking down how the show is going to go. And the first thing I note is something that will take place throughout. Frank likes to just talk about stuff.
He does.
He goes on tangents, including at the beginning of the show and throughout, talking about how summertime is slow for attendance in a lot of wrestling territories, but not as much so here in Portland. He has a lot of thoughts that may or may not be relevant to what's happening on this show.
Tom Peterson's truckload sale. He's got a 19-inch TV for sale for under $500, and it's got a remote control.
91 channels for $498 1981 American dollars, which has to be like $8,000 in modern times. I'm always blown away by the cost of things on these old commercials. We go back to Frank, he's ringside, but he's not telling us about the wrestling yet. Now Frank is doing his own ad read in a natural way, but his own ad read for the commercial that we just saw, saying that Tom also has whole room air conditioners.
We then get a commercial for Rainier Beer, which is a brew apart, but I've never had one. This is a very local beer to the Pacific Northwest. So is the ad. It's a premium beer bottle running through the nature of the Pacific Northwest. This is something. We go to the ring for our opener. We've got wrestling now. It's Jimmy Offey taking on King Parsons.
A young Iceman King Parsons, which I had to check because, as we'll see here on this show, there are names that you get excited about when you hear them, and then they end up not being those guys. Along those lines, as this match is starting, our announcer, Frank, tells us that the Destroyer will be on this week.
So excited.
The Destroyer was unmasked a couple times during the week prior, but will keep wrestling. And then he says that when the Destroyer was unmasked, that he had an afro and a mustache and was named David Sierra.
I was immediately confused, and I then had to go take it to the internets, and we'll talk about it when we get to the match later. But yeah, I was just as confused as you were hearing Frank Bonneman, who at this point in this match is just having a solo podcast.
He's inventing a podcast here. It's 100% a solo podcast. I'm by the way, the only thing that shocked me about this show was that we did not have, was it Bart Wayne as the fake tiger mask? It's the
We did
only
not,
thing.
yeah.
It's the only thing we're missing here. Frank is also talking how it's a good crowd tonight. It's not a great crowd. It's not like it was last Tuesday. He even says that, but we have a good crowd here. But he makes sure to point out that we have a sellout coming up in Eugene, Oregon.
He does a good job of catching you up on what's been going on around the territory. He tells you about this whole destroyer angle. The match that's happening in the background here is just a basic opener. The highlight being the facial expressions of King Parsons.
Yes.
Just a lot of holds, bear hug spots, headlocks, full Nelsons.
This is the most basic wrestling territory of anything that we've seen yet. Because when we see like even WWF, like, punch, kick, choke, that sort of thing, that's more of a choice. Whereas here, everybody seems to have been trained on the same three moves. It's all bear hugs, hip tosses, arm drags, a disturbing amount of side headlock takeovers throughout this 2 hours of professional wrestling. There is not much to write home about from an in-ring standpoint, certainly here in the opener, other than, like you said, proto Iceman King Parsons doing cool facial expressions.
They both miss splashes, and the time limit expires. This is a draw. We get handshakes after the match, but Afi gives Parsons a literal kick in the ass as he's walking away. He says he's just kidding. They do some low fives, and then Afi walks away, and he gets a kick in the ass on his way out from Parsons.
This post-match was as low intensity as the match, but it was actually amusing. There's some ridiculous stuff on commentary. We find out that the Continental Lover, Eddie Mansfield, was in a hair versus hair match with Steve Regal. Not that Steve Regal, the AWA Steve Regal, and got his head shaved. Frank is also exasperated, talking about Buddy Rose. He says Mean Matt Masters is coming to Portland. He also tells us that someone from Europe is coming from Portland, but we don't ever hear who they are. He talks about Jimmy Afi being a semi-main eventer. He also gets really distracted talking about crowd arrival times and whether wrestling shows should start at 7:30, 8 p.m., or 9 p.m. It is just total stream of consciousness. The only thing to write home about from an in-ring standpoint is, you guessed it, Iceman King Parsons misses the standing babyface splash.
We then get a rundown of the loop, which is LeGrand, Redmond, Albany, Oregon, Seattle, Eugene, and Portland. Thursday is the only day off on this loop. More on that later. More on that later.
This rundown, it is the most rudimentary rundown. It just looks like it's on this little board with a black background, white letters. This is very lo-fi here in 1981 in Portland.
Alan Tonkin from Marv Tonkin Ford is back. He tells you to push, pull, or drag your car in for a trade-in. You can get a new Ford Escort for $8,121 in early 1980s money.
Which is insane, because I remember paying like $5,000 for a Ford Escort as my first car. And it was $8,000 back then. That's like a $40,000 car now.
And the low interest rate of 17%.
It's the early 80s in the United States of America, people.
We get a commercial for Tri-Flow lubricant spray. We see people changing a tire, fixing a door to a phone booth, things that you don't see anymore.
No. A commercial very much of its time. Then we go from lubricant commercial to this is what we hear and see on the screen. Exotic, erotic, electric, hypnotic. Bo Derek stars in Tarzan the Ape Man, out in theaters now.
Rated R. Tarzan the Ape Man.
It sounds like it should be.
They run down the loop again. And there's a correction on the board. They are not, in fact, off on Thursday. They're going to be in Salem, Oregon on Thursday. So no days off on the loop. We're going all 7 days.
Yeah, and they are, Frank is back here with Dutch Savage. They go through the entire loop in more detail. They also talk about Elton Owen, or Owens, as they say here. And I believe, wasn't there a Portland wrestling Tales from the Territories, or am I making that up? Because I feel like I read and heard.
There is one, yes. Mm-hmm.
That is definitely where there's a companion to this. If you have not seen the Tales from the Territories on Portland wrestling, they go into more detail on Don Owen and Elton Owen and the difference between them, sort of the good cop, bad cop, and in promoting different cities in the loop.
Tom Peterson's selling a very 70s colonial sofa and love seat set.
Oh my God. Like this, yes. This, could you imagine walking in, like if you walked into someone's house now and saw this, you would assume that they had been dead for 40 years and no one had touched the house since. I remember as a child when my family, when we finally, when my parents bought a house, we had lived in apartments and they bought a house. And I remember went in, it was a fixer upper. And that's what, like, that was what the motif was. I remember there was the kitchen was painted green, like
Sure.
olive green. There was a couch that looked like that. I just remember like looking at my mom, like, what are we doing? But it ended up all working out.
We get Tiger's Milk Nutrition Bar, and Kane Mutiny movie is going to be the movie of the week on Sunday. We go to the ring. Tim Anderson is
you left out the best part from the loop. After we hear about the mistake and we don't have a day off, damn it, we run 7 days a week. This ends with Dutch Savage telling Frank that he has to leave to go see his relative Donna, and he just walks away. So odd.
Tiny Anderson is in the ring to take on Hacksaw Brett Sawyer, the brother of Buzz Sawyer. I love the jobber look on Tiny Anderson. He's got short trunk, quick fashion corner. He's got short trunks and then the full top with like the two-strap singlet. The tremendous look.
It's like he's like a Tiny Anderson version of King Kong Bundy a little bit with the gear here. But
Bundy had like regular straps. This is like the one that comes up to like your top of your chest is covered. It's like the full body shirt.
It's like a tank top. It's like a skin tight tank top rather than a singlet. No, that's a good catch. This man, Tiny Anderson, not tiny. Like I cannot fathom this guy that his first name is not Frank. He looks like he works at a gas station and his name is Frank. He is also my new favorite professional wrestler of all time. His stalling and his selling when the fans start chanting "Whale on a beach,
whale
on a beach." It's like it physically pains him. Like there's some sort of like EMP weapon pulsing in his ears as he sells on the floor, and these children are laughing. The few children there in the crowd, because the majority of this crowd is like 95 years old. But he is amazing.
He's throwing a tantrum outside. He takes a seat at ringside. He's complaining to the other people at ringside. This was great. This was the most entertaining stalling I've seen in a long time.
It's an absolute travesty that this man did not have Larry Zbyszko's career. He is an exponentially better Larry. Like I want on like an episode of Nitro from 1998, the first hour comes up and we see Tony Schiavone and we see Tiny Anderson and we hear the whole crowd chanting Tiny, Tiny, and he has to salute them. My God, this man was great.
Yeah, it was nothing but arm drags and stalling, but the crowd is having so much fun yelling at Anderson. I'm having fun watching Anderson react to the crowd. Sawyer ties Anderson's leg in the rope and starts laying in kicks to the down Tiny Anderson.
We should mention Sawyer looks like the Lost Fantastic is the best way to describe him. He looks like he's like the third or fourth member of the Fantastics.
He doesn't look like a member of the Sawyer family like you think.
No, and we've seen the two of them together before, once before. It's also interesting. So he's Hacksaw, and then they say that Buzz Sawyer is Buzzsaw Sawyer. I was not aware that Buzz Sawyer was short for Buzzsaw Sawyer. I love it.
Sawyer on offense, and Anderson has had enough. He ties Sawyer in the ropes and starts choking him and gets disqualified.
By the way, to me, this Sawyer looks about as much like a hacksaw as Shota Umino looks like a roughneck. I don't understand this nickname.
At the desk, we get a photo of Art Cruz, who will be here in the near future.
A photo. Don Owen during the previous match said, "Big husky Kansas lad Art Cruz will be here 2 weeks from tonight." And then after the match holds up an 8x10 before we kick it to commercial again.
Another Marv Tonkin commercial. We get a commercial for Olympia beer. They tell us it's in the water. And then we get an interview with Rip Oliver and Playboy Buddy Rose. Here's the Buddy Rose we've been talking about. Buddy is looking for a new recruit to start his army. He says he wants a tag title match against the tag team champions of Steve Regal and Matt Borne. He also wants a championship match against Regal, who's also the champion of the territory as well.
The Pacific Coast Championship.
Regal has been avoiding him. He will win that Pacific Coast title. Matt Borne has apparently challenged Rose. They recap the fact Rose can't stop mentioning that he's married to Borne's sister, and his sister has filled him in on the private life of Matt Borne. And
which, if you watched The Dark Side of the Ring, there's a lot of information to be filled in on here.
So apparently Matt Borne is challenging him to a match where he's going to name the stipulation, and the stipulation will be there to embarrass Buddy Rose.
Yeah, at first, the way this is described, it sounds like it's just a loser leaves town match, but then they go into more detail, and it's basically that Matt Borne has come up with a stipulation that when Buddy Rose loses, he will be so embarrassed that he will choose to leave the territory. And the idea is that Matt Borne has already picked this match, but he will not tell Buddy Rose what it is.
Rose talks about Destroyer, and he says, you outsmarted me by hitting me with a loaded mask. Again, he wants to know what the hell Matt Borne is talking about with this stipulation. We go to a commercial where Tom Peterson has truckloads of inventory to sell.
Truckloads of inventory. He just returned from the Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago, which I remember as a kid being big into video games, which I'm not anymore. But back then, like, the CES was the big video game convention that would take place. But here, I guess it was all about VHS recorders and things. There's some big set for $998 that they're selling. And as part of that, you get membership in the Tom Peterson Video Club.
That's right. You get a camera and a recorder. These are two separate devices. And then membership into Tom Peterson's Video Club. We then get a commercial for Escape from New York is now playing with Kurt Russell. I'm a big Kurt Russell fan, so that's exciting. 2 out of 3 falls as we go back to the ring.
But before we go back to the ring, though, we have Frank again doing another ad read for Tom here, talking that his video buy will be gone by this weekend. And then Frank also says that KYXY Radio has up-to-the-minute wrestling results on the weekend. So make sure to listen. This sounds like my dream city. Like this show is just okay. But a radio station that gives me wrestling results, yes.
Yes, I have something about that in my notes later. I get excited again when I hear about it. This is your main event. 2 out of 3 falls. Playboy Buddy Rose and Rip Oliver taking on the team of the Destroyer and Steve Regal. So again, not that Steve Regal. This is the AWA Steve Regal. And not that Destroyer. This is David Sierra. This is the David Sierra version of the Destroyer.
The David Sierra version of the Destroyer. I'm trying to think what band you could compare that to. It's like the guy from American Idol, like with Queen? It's the Adam Lambert version of Queen? Is that what we have here?
No, because Adam Lambert is a talented
that's true
performer.
Yes.
This would be man. No, this is.
I'm trying to think even a wrestling comp, like someone who replaced another character.
This is fake like, Diesel, fake Razor Ramon.
Is this fake Sin Cara?
Fake Sin Cara is a fake. Yeah, because he's this Destroyer, this David Sierra is actually competent. Had a long career, but he's definitely not
a guy when held up with one of the greatest of all time, Dick Beyer, the Destroyer. I do not think that this guy was best friends with Mike Tenay. I could be wrong.
No, that is not.
Cauliflower Alley did not honor this version of the Destroyer on a yearly basis.
Yeah, and this David Sierra version is not that Destroyer. So
He also, but it's basically the Destroyer mask, but he looks hilarious because he's got this huge mustache. The mask is trying to hold on this curly afro that they talked about, and then he has the bushiest eyebrows you've ever seen exploding out of this mask. It is a look.
Yeah, I had so he wrestled under the name Fidel Sierra a bunch of times, Cuban Assassins
Oh
a
my
bunch of
God.
times.
This is that guy. This guy was even in WCW.
He
like
was
the
in
Nitro
WCW.
era as a job. Wow. I did not realize this was Fidel Sierra, the Cuban assassin.
Yeah, Sierra and Ricky Santana were unmasked on a Clash of the Champions when they lost to the Nasty Boys.
Wow, I guess I could have worn my Nitro shirt. I could have worn a WCW shirt and it would have been relevant. Damn.
Yeah, so again, he went on to have a long career, but not when you're parachuting in, you're thinking Destroyer, you're going to get some Dick Beyer. That's not
well,
what
especially sort of the hive mind that this podcast has had lately in terms of getting Destroyer, particularly on the bonus feed.
Yeah,
I thought, well, here you go. I didn't even think of the fact that this could be a fake Destroyer.
Matt Borne steps aside in this match so the Destroyer can get a shot at Rose and Oliver. So this was Destroyer used to be part of a group with Rose and Oliver.
The Army.
Yes, and now he's trying to get revenge here. So Rose spends the entire first fall trying to avoid the Destroyer. He tags out. He runs away anytime Destroyer gets in.
It's a ton of stalling. We should note, though, this crowd is so much more into this than anything else on this show. Like, this might come across through modern eyes and through non-Portland territory fan eyes as kind of slow and kind of lame, just a ton of stalling. But these fans were heavily, heavily invested in this.
Yeah, and these are long stories that have been going on with Rose here and Matt Borne and Destroyer.
And with generational characters. Matt Bourne's dad was a star in Portland, if I'm not mistaken, like a big time star. We have referee Sandy Barr, whose family goes back and goes for everything. Favorite of this podcast, and they say that tongue in cheek, Jesse Barr. So like this is not only is it a big local thing, it's a generational thing, both among the fans and the wrestlers and the promoters.
Eventually, Destroyer gets in. Rose runs away again. A punch to the stomach by Oliver, and they get the heat on Regal. Double team offense by Rose and Oliver.
I was trying to think of a way to describe this Steve Regal to people who have never seen him. And visually, to me, he's like he looks like the transition in the career of the guy I'm about to mention, of like from Thurman Sparky Plug to bodacious Bob Holly. That is sort of what he looks like. Like, he's tall but not too tall. He's in good shape but not too good a shape. And he's got this sort of blondish mullet, and he's okay. He's kind of the epitome of the pretty good baby face that's pushed as a much bigger star in a smaller territory than he would be in a smaller territory. But he's not bad. Like, he's competent. He's a horrendous promo, which we'll see later. But he's fine. He's no Lord Steven Regal. That's for sure.
He's like a young Johnny Ace type of vibe that I got from him.
You know who you talk about Johnny? He also reminds me of, from this same era, Johnny Gunn, Tom Brady. They're very similar.
Yeah, good comp there. So Oliver goes for the shoulder breaker on Regal, but Regal slips behind him and gets the pin. So Regal and Destroyer. So the heat was on Regal the entire time. He gets the flash pin here with a roll up. And Regal and Destroyer win the first fall.
Rip Oliver, by the way, to me, and again, this is really, I haven't seen him many times. This is the most extended exposure I've had to him. He's just a guy. He had really nothing to say and didn't say it in a very interesting way in the promo. He is just like, visually, he does not look that different from Buddy Rose, other than he has a beard. They're in similar shape, but Buddy Rose is clearly the star of this act.
Between falls, Rose gets a cheap shot in on the Destroyer. And then they take the time to run down the loop one more time.
Well, so this is the deal. Between falls, you think about 2 out of 3 falls matches, Lucha or other matches, 2 out of 3 falls, where it's like you get a very brief rest period, like 10, 30, maybe 60 seconds at most, and then we're right back into the next fall. Here, They do the fall. The wrestlers go to the back.
They go to the locker room.
They go to the locker room. We get a commercial break. We come back. We get more talking from Frank. We go to another commercial, and then they bring the wrestlers back to the ring from the locker room. And then they do the next fall. It seems like from an athletic standpoint, this seems like a way to just invite injury. You're in there, you're going for 15 minutes, you go back, you just cool your jets for 10 minutes, and then you come back and do it all over again. Just a really weird vibe. I've never seen another territory do that this way.
No, never seen it either. We go back to Al Tonkin Ford. He's in studio, and he's looking like he's going to wrestle. And then a woman comes in and says, and Tonkin looks at her and says, I don't want to hurt her, but she does a quick judo throw. And from the ground, Al Tonkin takes a call and says he's got to go. And I believe that this was Princess Victoria, who she was one of the roundtable participants in the Tales from the Territory about Portland.
I did not put that together when I watched this. What I did put together, though, was a GIF of this exact moment. If you follow us on social media, this is what you saw, alerting you to the fact that Portland 1981 was going to be the topic of this week's show.
Again, you should be following us on all social media platforms: X, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky. We're on all of them at WrestleAtRandom, and you can see that GIF.
I feel like we should also be on social media of the past. Obviously, there was no social media in 1981, but if we're doing a WWF show from 2005, we should be posting about this on LiveJournal.
God.
Blurty, MySpace, come on.
Frank Bonneman interviews Steve Regal. You mentioned he's a terrible promo. He tells us he's defending his title Friday in Eugene, and they run down the loop again.
Again, this is all happening in between the first and second fall. The wrestlers go to the back. We get a commercial break. We get a stand-up promo interview, and with one of the participants. One of the participants in the match. And then we go again to another commercial break. Tom Peterson is once again returned from the Consumer Electronics System, this time with a $500 sound system, Consumer Electronics Show, I should say, $500 sound system rack. You can buy them individually, though, if necessary. And then we hit a commercial that
Wait, before you get to that commercial, I want to make mention about this stereo because I was salivating looking at this stereo. Okay, for $500, okay? This is one of those late 70s, early 80s stereos that if you bought it for $500 in 1981, you would still own it today in 2024. These things were built to last. I had one in the, my parents had theirs from the 70s, and it was gifted to me in the early 90s and in late 80s, and that thing kept on keeping on. Those things were amazing.
We had not yet entered the planned obsolescence era of technology.
No. And then we go to a Pizza Hut pan pizza commercial.
Okay, so I'm a Pizza Hut child. It was really the center of my universe in the mid to late 80s. Book It was really, I probably would not have learned how to read.
We've talked about Book It before on this podcast. Yes, very influential.
Very influential in my life. And seeing here, and granted, I was born in 1981, but this is the vibe, this is the aesthetic, this is the fashion corner that you were taken to when you went into Pizza Hut. This commercial captured the feeling of being in a Pizza Hut in the 80s so deeply. Like I said, if we did not have Princess Victoria hitting a beautiful judo throw on a car salesman immediately preceding this 100% would have been the gift for this week's show.
No, they did nail it. Pizza Hut was a restaurant, and it was a big deal. My family, we never went to restaurants, so it was a big deal when we would go to the Pizza Hut and we were going to sit down in the Pizza Hut. This was, incredible. It totally captured the vibe.
Yes, I wanted to live inside of this commercial for the rest of my life. If this commercial looped for the rest of my life for 30-second intervals and I was in it experiencing the feelings that were conveyed through this, I would be a happy man.
We are back for the second fall. All of that happened, and now we're ready.
All of that later. Like, I had convinced myself that we were not going to have to see any more of this match, and yet, in fact, I was wrong.
All Regal and Destroyer to start the second fall.
Well, before that, though, the second fall, before it starts, Frank is back. He's trying to give out a phone number for tickets. He forgets it. He maybe gave out the wrong number and then panics and says, only call that after 3 p.m. He talks about the concession stand at the flea market, but go later in the day when things calm down. The second fall begins, and he is still trying to remember this number and is still panicking that maybe he gave out the wrong one. Amazing.
All Regal and Destroyer to start the second fall. Rose cuts Destroyer off with a knee to the back from the apron. We get a one-arm atomic drop by Rose. That was very unique looking.
It was very unique looking, and we also got one of my favorite things, which you talk about on the podcast all the time. Local wrestling announcers bluffing their way through moves that they don't know the names of. This one-arm atomic drop, Frank calls a sit-out backbreaker, which I'm trying in my mind's eye to imagine what a sit-out backbreaker would look like. And I guarantee you it would not be an atomic drop. Although maybe Roderick Strong should use this as his new finisher and call it a sit-out backbreaker.
We then hear again about the wrestling radio show that you talked about earlier.
Yes.
So there's apparently a Portland radio show that recaps what happened on the Loop, and it's like sports talk radio before sports talk radio was really a big thing. This is 1981. This is a crazy innovation for Portland at the time. I want to talk to Jim Valley about, like, because I know he was someone who would have been listening to that religiously.
Oh, 100%. I was a radio kid growing up. One of my greatest memories was, like, as an 11-year-old tuning the dial and getting crackling out of Cleveland. I believe it was WTAM. They carried Mike Tenay's Wrestling Insiders show. So I'm sure I would have enjoyed this.
They continue working the back of the Destroyer. We get a fun move where Destroyer's laying on his back across the top turnbuckles in the corner, and Buddy Rose from his back is on the mat, and he keeps kicking him in the back, and Destroyer keeps bouncing up and down on the turnbuckle over and over again. I don't think I've ever seen that move.
It was tremendous, and it also stood out because this in-ring action, other than this, was horrendously boring. Like, my notes say, I cannot accurately describe just how boring this action is. But again, it's tempered by Frank just doing Frank things. He's talking about how Don Owen is encouraged by the sponsors to bring the main events onto television. You don't hear that. You don't get that from most other promoters, but our sponsors bring them to you.
We see Destroyer gets kicked over the top to the floor, and he hits his lower back on the apron on the way down. Destroyer hits a desperation double noggin knocker. He teases the tag, but gets cut off again.
We're 20 minutes into this match. It feels every bit of it. We also had Frank randomly talking about floor director Alex Alejandro Sierra and wondering if he's related to the Destroyer David Sierra. He also riffs about fans throwing things in the ring, saying you're an idiot to do it. And worse yet, you almost always hit the wrong guy, and basically says you're going to cause the baby face to lose. Stop doing this.
Destroyer reverses and hits an atomic drop to make the hot tag to Regal. Regal runs wild on both guys. And then out of nowhere, they catch him and hit a spiked shoulder breaker, and Rip Oliver gets the pin to win the second fall.
Yeah, the spike shoulder breaker was great. This is such a weird match because 95% of this is just the most boring offense you've ever seen. Like I said, everything in this territory is hip toss, side headlock takeover, arm drag. That's all it is. But then you get stuff like that cool double team in the corner or this spike shoulder breaker out of nowhere.
So the first fall was Regal, like it was the baby faces getting dominated, and Regal with a flash pin gets the win. Here, the baby faces are dominated, and then they actually get the win in the second fall. So it's been a showcase for Rose and Oliver here.
Yes, 100%.
More Tonkin Ford commercials. We get a Midas Muffler commercial. And then one half of the tag team champions, Matt Borne, is interviewed between the second and third fall of this match. He teases the stipulation that will embarrass Buddy Rose, but he's going to make him and all of us wait a little longer to find out what it is.
He's not a great promo, at least here, for a guy who was the top star, top babyface in the company. He's not a great promo. I'm also offended as I realize that we're watching Portland TV. I see Matt Borne, the future Big Josh, and I am realizing we are not going to get a northern exposure here in the Pacific Northwest. This is travesty.
Princess Victoria takes down El Tonkin again. I could watch this all day.
A different takedown, though. This is a different thing. She says he should stick to selling cars, and then Buddy Rose and Matt Borne's sister walk in and make fun of El Tonkin and leave. This is tremendous.
This was great. I loved this. And then the third fall starts.
Again, the guys went to the back and are now exhausted coming back to the ring here for the third fall.
The third fall starts with Rose working on the arm and shoulder of Regal after that spiked shoulder breaker. Regal tags in Destroyer, and he finally gets his hands on Rose here in the third fall. Destroyer misses a second rope knee drop attempt. Rose posts the knee of Destroyer. And then Rose puts on a half crab, and the Destroyer submits. Rose and Oliver are your winners. They beat the crap out of these baby faces the entire time. They win. They double team Regal until after the match until Matt Borne hits the ring to make the save. Kids swarm the ringside area.
Rush the ring for autographs in the middle of this like blood feud hatred. Kids like, I got to get an autograph from Matt Borne.
They help the Destroyer to the back. And then we get a Rose promo where he demands a title match next Saturday. He said the tag team titles. He wants a shot at the tag team titles after that victory right there. Borne and Regal come over. Again, they're the tag team champions. Borne says, you got it. You can have the title match. Rose was hilarious because he says, I thought the people were behind me, and everyone boos loudly. Rose vows to win the titles next Saturday.
What is very clear here is that Buddy Rose is carrying this feud. Matt Borne he's a fun in-ring wrestler. He's a not very good promo. He's got the family history in the territory. That's a big part of why he's the guy. But Buddy Rose is the guy making this interesting.
So that's the end of the show. I did have to look up what the stipulation was.
Yes, tell me. Tell us.
Apparently, the stipulation is loser has one of three choices.
Oh boy, dealer's choice.
You can have your head shaved, you can leave town, or loser has to let the winner manage them for 1 year.
For a year? Wow.
Yes.
So what ended up happening?
I didn't get that far in my research. So if you know what happened, if you can fill us in on how the rest of this played out, make sure you send us a message on the social media platforms we mentioned earlier at Wrestling
Better
Random.
yet, don't send us a message on social media. Become a supporter, become a patron, join the Intentionalizer tier, and pick that show. If you can find it, there's tape of it where they have that match. Or maybe the TV following up on that explains what happened. It's got to be out there. You could do that.
You can support the show via our Patreon, patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom. That's where we do a bonus episode every single week. So it's something you haven't heard before. If you've just been listening to the free feed, you've got an entire back catalog, 5 full seasons of free episodes. It's all evergreen content. It's all new to you. But if you've gone through all that, you're like, I've heard all those episodes. Well, there's 150 plus more episodes at the time of this recording over on the bonus feed. Those you haven't heard. Those are all exclusive to our Patreon supporters. Again, patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom. We also have a tier where you can be the randomizer. You can choose a show for us to watch. We've watched a ton of shows, curated lists, all kinds of fun stuff over on the bonus feed. And make sure that if you can't support the show in these times financially, that's okay too. Make sure you tell your wrestling fan friends about the show. Wrestling fans know other wrestling fans, so make sure you're telling them about the show. Have them take a fun trip down memory lane with us. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. We're going to call it a podcast. Our first trip to Portland, Adam. Let's go through your favorite thing on this show.
Ooh, I mean, the commercials. So without a doubt, it's the Pizza Hut commercial. If I have to say not the commercials, I would just say the performance of Buddy Rose, both in ring and particularly in the promos. This was a very dry show from an in-ring standpoint. He stood out the most. And then honorable mention, even though he wasn't good, he was highly entertaining. Our host, Frank Bonovan, what was his name again?
Yes, it was Frank Bonneman.
Yeah. Frank Bonneman, he was just delightful, including where they went back to him and he didn't realize that he was still on camera before the break, and he took a nice long drink of his 7-Up cup, whatever was in there. Just a really funny guy.
Yeah, I agree. Buddy Rose, obviously the star of the show. I think, honorable mention to the facial expressions of a young King Parsons. Did enjoy that
good
highly.
Call.
Worst thing on this show, a lot to choose from.
Oh man, for me, it's more of a macro thing. It's the in-ring style. It was just mind-numbing, very basic, and everyone did the same things. But really, to me, the worst thing on the show is being promised the Destroyer and Steve Regal, and instead getting David Sierra and that Steve Regal.
Yeah, I think that this show being I don't know if this is like a weekly show that I don't know if this is an outlier or if this is just like the format of the show, but
it needed Roddy Piper.
Yeah, it was slow going. Like, and not just like we've seen plenty of shows from 1981 from different territories. Like, and I don't know if it's just because it was so many local sponsorship stops, you could never get a good flow going of like a wrestling show. It was just so many ads. But yeah, it's and maybe it's a different, it's all about selling the loop, and going to the live shows is a completely different experience. But yeah, this was not my favorite territory, I'd say.
I would agree with that. To me, it's one of those where it's like, if you grew up and this is the only wrestling you saw, you probably thought it was great. And then once you got exposed to other wrestling, you're like, oh, I don't know about this. You start getting Florida tapes, you start getting Georgia tapes or Crockett or Mid-South or Memphis. This was not at that level at all. Again, no, saying that with the knowledge that there were times, particularly when Roddy Piper was there, where I'm sure it was more of an electric show. But yeah, this did not pass the if this was the first time I had seen wrestling as a child, would I keep watching test, which is always, I think, where we're both at on these territories from this era.
But that's the thing with the randomizer. You never know where it's going to drive you. It giveth and it taketh away. But we got to see some Portland wrestling. Always great to experience another territory that we were unfamiliar with. A blind spot has been checked off the list. So always a great time. And with that, we're going to call it a podcast. Adam, thank you for joining us.
Yes. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Randomizer. I feel like we're going to need something next week. Hopefully the randomizer will give us something that's got a bit more life to it. I say that, then I'm sure we're going to get like a Vince Russo Nitro from 2000 or something. But something that just jumps off the page a little bit more than this one did would be nice.
And a reminder, if you like to consume your podcast via YouTube, don't forget to give the YouTube channel a like and subscribe over there. Search for Wrestling at Random Podcast on YouTube. It'll take you right there. Or go to our website, wrestlingatrandom.com. All the links that I described are all there. And with that, we're calling it a podcast. Thanks again, everyone, for listening. We'll talk to you again